And orange-handed. Yeah. Woo! Well, this stuff is supposed to wash right off, right? Hey, Dylan, you want to pick that up? Show me what you got. Pick up that shirt. Show me what you got. I'll stand over here so I'm not looking in the sun. Yeah, let's go this way. There. Now that looks really super cool. Yeah, let's see the front of it. There we go. Excellent. We did this in the car. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Ben. Isn't that Ben? No.
Yeah. You know him? No, he looks like someone we know.
Yeah, he sure did.
I thought he did too.
Yeah, okay, so we're going to pack up. I'm going to put that stinky shirt on now.
Yeah, and I thought that looked like Grace in the passenger seat, so. I don't know her, but I've seen her picture.
Here we are. I expected something a little more monumental.
Grassroots?
This grassroots. This is what it's all about. I forgot your name already.
My name's Rakiba.
Yeah, Rakiba. Name's Dan. You want to just say hi to people back in Muskegon?
Muskegon, solidarity from Occupy Detroit.
Excellent, yeah. Well, look for us on Facebook.
This is our Occupy Midwest gathering.
We're here.
I wish you were here, but I'm glad that somebody's here from Muskegon.
Yeah, we're here. You bet. And we'll put this on Facebook when we get back home. Here comes an old friend, too, from Kalamazoo or Grand Rapids.
Yep, he's from the zoo.
Kalamazoo, right?
You're from the zoo, right?
Yeah, Kazoo? You're from Kalamazoo. Or Lansing. This guy's from Lansing.
Oh, you're Lansing?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a troublemaker.
What'd you say?
There's a troublemaker.
Yeah, we're together again. Nice to see you.
Yeah,
You bet. Oh, sorry about that. You know, we're doing this shirt here. Yeah, okay, thanks. I gotta see my shirt. I gotta see what it looks like.
Oh, you complete though?
99%. Hey, I got the numbers going in the right direction, right? Okay. Yeah, Rocky.
Yeah, and I would love to have you on that radio show. So many years, not just what the police did.
Right.
That's terrible on its own, but it's also just, they were underpaid. I mean,
Right.
to give you a reference, the miners got paid 4,000 rand a month, and the guy on the board, the guy representing the miners, not the head of the union, just one of the head shop stewards, I was getting paid 104,000 rand a month.
What is random compared to the dollar?
It's 8 to 1, so $8 is 8 rand is $1. Don't you wish it was the other way around?
Well, 100 and some rand. I mean, if you divide that by 8, that's a lot of money.
It's 500 rand. It's $500. So miners are getting paid $500 a month. And then the union representatives were getting paid like $18,000 a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. Awesome. So it's such a big difference.
Yeah.
Back here, is everybody excited to be here? Woo! Yeah, because this person that I'm going to bring up to the stage deserves every ounce of energy that you could possibly muster up in your bodies right now. She is a legendary activist, philosopher, organizer, visionary. Right now, she is the driving force behind the Boggs Center with the Boggs board members, Detroit Summer founder, and I could go on and on and on. She's been doing activism for more than 70 years. She is 97 years young. 97 years young and out here with us today. So we owe her the respect. We owe her the courtesy of giving her our undivided attention and giving it up for Grace Lee Boggs. Okay, 1 minute, let me y'all might want to shift.
Hello, everybody. As you can see, I am a very old woman. I was born in 1915 during what became the First World War and 2 years before the Russian Revolution. I have a very hard of hearing, I have very few teeth, but I still have most of my marbles. Well, I never was a good outdoor speaker, but I've gotten worse. So I don't know how I'm going to do in a backyard. So what I'd like to ask, to start off by asking everybody who's from out of town to say your name and what out of town place you come from. Could we go around?
Maybe if you can stand up and then just kind of go around so we'll know.
Who's not from Detroit? Go ahead, stand on your feet.
If you're not
from Detroit, stand up.
Yeah. Say where you're from.
Hey!
South Africa.
What's your name?
Bosu.
What's your name?
Tangerine Dreamer.
Namsa, South Africa.
The Serendipities, St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah!
Captain Vala from Austin, Texas.
Yeah!
Night Shift from Austin, Texas.
Dan Mills, Occupy Muskegon. Yeah!
Matt from Muskegon.
Matt from Muskegon.
Dylan from
Point that thing around. Hey, Dylan, Muskegon. All right, Matt.
New York.
New York. Matt.
La Bamba from Roanoke, Virginia.
Pass the mic to somebody else.
Cat, Minneapolis.
There we are.
Solar Eclipse, St. Louis.
James, Cleveland.
One Drop, New York City.
Yeah! Rafe the Rat Master, Lansing.
Matthew Moon, Berkeley, Michigan.
Yay!
Oh, that's Detroit.
Fuzzy from Ann Arbor.
Nils from Scotland.
Buzz from Wheaton, Illinois.
Hey!
Greg Gijigumi from Northeast Missouri.
Welcome!
Dean, Occupy the Lakeshore in West Michigan.
West Michigan.
Come on, everybody.
Where you from? What's your name? Who's from out of town if you're still standing?
Yeah. Catherine from Occupy the Lakeshore, West Michigan.
West Michigan.
Susan from Occupy the Lakeshore.
West Michigan. Anybody else?
Becky, Iraqi, Occupy Cleveland.
Cleveland in the house. The UK. Sophie. We're from England. Anybody else?
I'm from Washington State. Grew up in Seattle. I was on the road when Occupy started.
On the road how?
I've been traveling
on your
for the
bicycle?
last year.
On your bike.
On your bicycle?
I have my bike with me. I hitchbike a lot.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay. Well, welcome to Detroit. I want to tell you something about coming to Detroit. I came to Detroit nearly 60 years ago, and I've lived here most of that time in the same house. And one of the things that I hope you will get from your visit to Detroit is what I have gotten over the last 60 years. Detroit is a place where you have to be asking yourself all the time, what time is it on the clock of the world? I never used to think of that question. I was raised in New York. In New York, you have a lot of people, you have a lot of tourists, and everything is bright lights, and things are bright. You think it's going to be bright forever. You come to Detroit, and what happens is that one day, when I arrived, there were 2 million people, and my husband was working at a plant where there were 17,000 employees. And the next year, there were only 2,000. And whereas in the beginning when I came, if you threw a stone up in the air and came down there, it would hit a Chrysler worker. By the next year, if you threw a stone up in the air, when it came down, it would hit a vacant lot. And then you had to begin asking yourself, what does that all mean? And you don't think of that so much in other cities, but you learn in Detroit, because Detroit was once the national and the international symbol of the miracles of industrialization. And with a very short time, it became the national and the international symbol of the devastation of deindustrialization. And now, strangely enough, it's becoming the national and international symbol of a post-industrial society. And you don't feel that in other cities. So I hope very much that as you move around Detroit, you'll get that sense of moving from one epoch to another epoch to another epoch, and feel yourself as a part of that process, of that transition. And that you have to think and feel and act in a way that meets the needs of such tremendous transitions. In Detroit, you feel, and what I feel, and I hope you will begin to feel, that we're in the midst of a transformation, a transition as profound as that from hunting and gathering to agriculture, and from agriculture to industry 300 years ago. The first was 11,000 years ago, the other was a few hundred years ago, and now in the 21st century, we're making a transition to a completely different epoch. You have to think in terms of epochs in Detroit. You have to organize with an eye and a mind for epochs in Detroit. You don't do that in other cities. And the few days that you spend here, I hope, will give you that sense that you have to do this for the country and for the world. In other words, we are in a situation in this country, and you feel it more in Detroit than elsewhere, where we have been in 2 wars, we've lost 2 wars, where the people in Washington and in Lansing and in whatever capital have no idea what to do, where things are getting worse all the time, and the mobilization of the people has begun as with Occupy Detroit. What do you do with that mobilization? That's your challenge. How do you break out of old ways of thinking? How do you do the kind of visionary organizing that will challenge people to see themselves as part of the future? You can't do that by protesting. You can't do that by just being more militant. You can't do that just by challenging the cops. You have to begin doing much more imaginative thinking. You have to reimagine revolution. You have to reimagine work. You have to reimagine education. And you have to be part of that reimagining. And you have to sort of, everybody who's around you has to feel that you're part of the future. And you are helping them to see themselves not as part of the past, but as creators and prophets and imaginers and creators of the future. That's a very, very different way of thinking about our mission, our responsibility, than most people have. And think in terms of epoch, think in terms of imagination, think in terms of reimagining everything and helping everybody to reimagine everything. Because, you know, Einstein said that we have, with the splitting of the atom, we changed everything but the human mind, and thus we drift for catastrophe. And that imagination was more important than education. How do you imagine the future? How do you help other people to imagine the future so that they feel they have to become part of it and that they can become part of it? I have an article here. I'm only going to leave one copy, but you can find on the web, if you look up Bunyan Bryant, Rehearsal for the Future, you'll find how he talks about we don't need to know the past, but we really need to rehearse the future. He was saying this at a particular time when, in 1991, 92, when the Soviet Union, which had represented the dream of a new society, had just dissolved, and when the American dream was dying because of globalization and the export of jobs elsewhere. And under those circumstances, when the two dreams that have shaped our thinking and health radicals to organize are no longer there. They're dead. What do we do as organizers, as activists? I think that's the challenge that faces occupiers, that they have not really addressed. I think that until they address it, they're going to think that they can achieve what is necessary by increasing militancy, and that increasing militancy will eventually end you on the defensive. We have to substitute, replace the old paradigm of the opposition of the left to the right with the opposition of the past to the future, or the future to the past. That's a whole new way of thinking. It's a whole new way of believing. It's a whole new way of organizing. I call it visionary organizing. And as I say, you can read about it in this document, which I'll leave you a copy. But you can read about it on the web if you Google Bunyan Bryan Rehearsal for the Future. So I think that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you.
So Grace is going to open up the floor for some questions. She mentioned to you that she's not really easy at hearing, and so that's why we have the microphone. If you have a question, we're going to pass this around, and she'll give you she'll address you. So I guess I'll ask the first question. Grace, can you hear me? When you talk about, can anybody hear me? I can't hear myself. Yeah. When you talk about reimagining work or reimagining education or the potential for building on the capacity for something new, can you give some examples of things that are going on around in Detroit today?
I've been a radical since 1941. Before I came to Detroit, I had spent 10 years working with C.L.R. James. I studied Capital. I read Lenin. I knew all about Marxism and Leninism. And I didn't realize how much they're part of the past. Marx was writing in the 19th century in a period of scarcity. He was writing in the wake of the French Revolution. Representative democracy had been created by the French Revolution, but we had reached, in 200 years, industrialization, instead of being the wave of the future, had become deindustrialization. Representative democracy had become millions of dollars for campaign funds, and Citizens United and the Koch brothers. That's what's happened to representative democracy. We're on the threshold of something very, very new. We're on the threshold of a new mode of production. We're on the threshold of a new mode of politics. We're on the threshold of a new kind of education. And unless you're ready to open your mind to imagine all these, you're going to go nowhere. You're going to try and get more and more militant and hope by being militant and by savaging the cops, you'll achieve something. And you won't know what time it is on the clock of the world and what is required of you. So I think that's all I want to say.
Who had a question?
So I was just curious, can you hear me? Okay. In your re-education, what do you think about open source ecology, open source production, rather than mass production, making it localized production, with the current technologies that we have that have created this threshold that we're on?
Most people think the answer to our problem, to the crisis, is more jobs. Most of you are not thinking that jobs, as the industrial age has produced them, are a trap.
Say that again.
You get tied to the machine. You begin doing the kind of work that robots can do, and you compensate for that by wanting higher wages and more consumption goods and fancier cars and fancier homes. We've got to begin thinking about work in a very different way, and to know that the work that was done in the country was much more enhancing to the human being than work done in the city, work done in industry. We should not be demanding more jobs. We should say, what does the new informational technology offer us in the way of a more creative, more productive, more human form of production? And if you will look up the work of Frischoff Bergman, which you can find on the Bog Center website, you will see that he talks about how, using the new technology, we are able to produce what we need right in our communities. So goodbye Walmart, goodbye China, and cheap goods. Let's begin thinking about a new mode of production that is based upon the new technology. That requires imagination, but it's possible. And Frischoff has shown this by his work in India and in Africa, and he's going to Russia in a couple of weeks because people want to find out about that. Can you imagine that in our communities, instead of going to Walmarts for cheap goods, we can create our own housing, we can create our own clothing, we can create our own transportation according to our needs and not in accordance with the market. That's imagination. That's understanding that when you reach a whole new epoch, you have to think differently about work. We have to think differently about education. Our education creates or prepares kids for jobs that don't exist. Our education is a system that prepares young people to leave the community, to up the ladder. And meanwhile, everything up the ladder has disappeared. We've got to begin thinking differently about education, about place-based education that involves our young people in actually solving problems in our community. Our present system of education is a form of child abuse. And whatever is being offered by Artie Duncan or Obama isn't any better than Bush's No Child Left Behind. It's just race to the top, which is the toppling over. I mean, that's imagination. Reimagine education. Reimagine community. Think of community not as a hood, but as a neighbor restored to the hood. And Ron Scott's going to talk about that.
So is that it? One more question?
Yeah. Do you have a question? You want to take one more question?
Okay. You want to do one more?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do one more question. Fuzzy?
All right, my question is, can we use our existing systems in certain ways to co-opt them into turning around into the society that we're seeking by going through and finding the corruption that's happened with our legislators, removing them, going through the ethics complaint process to remove elected officials, and demanding accountability through full audits and revelation of information through the Freedom of Information Act.
I know you fired up, so let me get you the mic.
I think we need to ask ourselves, what time is it on the clock of the world? I think that we are in a period of revolution, which is also a period of counter-revolution. I think the counter-revolution is very real, I think what happened in Aurora, at the Aurora Theater in Colorado, what happened in Wisconsin with the Sikh killings, and what's happening in the South these days, and all over the country, is a rising counter-revolution, which is very much like that which happened in Germany in the 1930s. And they just lost the war. They had tremendous unemployment. There was tremendous suffering, but they didn't have the imagination to go beyond the party system. And demagogues like Hitler are all over the place. And unless we have the imagination, unless we're able to look at our situation and understand how deep a crisis we're in, and that a crisis is not only a danger, but an opportunity. How do we seize that time? How do we seize that opportunity? How do we have the imagination, the creativity to do that? That requires a lot of thinking what it means to be a human being. To know that we are in a stage of revolution that is also an evolution. Where's Kim?
Yeah, sure.
Kim?
Yeah, show your...
the shirt. Yes.
What's the shirt? It says
Evolution. R, parentheses, evolution. We're evolving as human beings. That's a new revolution.
And we're at a stage of evolution in terms of imagination, in terms of our minds, in terms of the way we work, in the way we think, in the way that we educate our children. That, I would say, is profound as that from hunting and gathering to agriculture, and from agriculture to industry. You have to think with that sort of, imagine with that kind of breadth of depth.
Can I add one thing, please?
I'm sorry.
I think as a group, or many groups, we need to demand before the election that Obama keep his promise to stop poisoning us, because that poison's accumulative. That's why we have things like Aurora and Pharma. It's just really important to get rid of the Koch brothers and Monsanto, and you need to do something, make some kind of thing that would go viral or something to let them know. Because if that doesn't stop, it doesn't matter, who gets in. You can't keep living eating poison. And and the many other issues too, but it's like we're like sheep. We're just sitting here just letting them do that to us, and the average person needs to know that the food they're eating is why we have millions of people in this country sick, and it's from all that food. The list is that long on it with all the poisons, and people keep buying it. So please, anyone wants to get together, and something like that, not in the baseball team, and do something like that where we could send something like that. It's very important. Can't get to Washington that comes against the millions of people against being poisoned. So if anyone has any ideas, please let Grace know too, because I'm sure that. Oh, there she is.
Well, I think that summing up, I think that's why it's important to consider what Grace was talking about reimagining everything, growing your own food, education, things like that. So you don't have to rely on the government to provide you poisonous food. Yes. So attacking the government is kind of going backwards at this point. So, okay, so I want y'all to give a round of... Grace, you want to make a final comment?
She doesn't make a final
comment. Okay.
Backwards with the man.
No, you need to take it.
No.
I think what I think we have to understand is that protest and demands on the government meant that the government could do something at a time when we had empire, at a time when we had lost 2 wars, at a time when we weren't talking about cutting back. And the question is, do we go beyond protest? Do we go beyond thinking that somebody else is going to do this and we keep thinking of what we have to do?
Yeah.
Please give another round of applause. So if you can leave your email addresses with Jason, that would be great. Okay? So this next person that I want to bring up to the microphone, excuse me, is standing over here acting quiet, but y'all going to see that that's not his demeanor at all. He is a former Black Panther Party member. He is the founder of the Coalition Against Police Brutality, Peace Zones for Life. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself, but I think those three things alone let you know what you're in store for, right? So I want y'all to bring it up to the top of the roof for Ron Scott.
Okay, give yourselves another hand for being here tonight.
Yes.
I want to give a shout out to the next generation, and I want to thank them for being here tonight. And even though she's closer to my age, she's really part of the next generation. Theo Broughton, working in this neighborhood. Raise your hand, Theo. Yeah! Okay, Josiah, raise your hand, bro. See your brother standing over there in the brown shirt? That's Yusef Shakur. And you will hear about his books and the Urban Network and so forth. And I want to thank, I mean, there are many, many others I could. Where's Sarah? Sarah. Okay, Sarah went. Let me tell you about Sarah. Like, there was a woman that was being attacked, that was about to be raped across the street from the Bog Center. Sarah ran out. Sarah ran out. Come here, Sarah. Come here, Sarah. Sarah ran out and come here. Sarah ran out and intervened, and she didn't really think about whether or not she was personally going to be safe. She thought about the humanity of the person that she was running to work with and to rescue, and she moved to that first. Her humanity and her respect for humanity was first, even before her own presumed safety. Now this is a new level of human concern. It wasn't that she was saying, I'm going to be a hero, I'm going to be in the newspaper, I'm going to be on the news. It was about the sanctity of human life and the protection and promotion of that human life. And because she did it, then at the same time there were others that came out and also intervened. And so therefore, like when she did that, I said, Sarah, I said, you did that. She said, it was nothing. I just did that.
It was the neighborhood, you know, like that guy was apprehended, that woman, you know, had something horrible happen to her, but, you know, I really do think it was just the neighborhood that I live in is that kind of neighborhood.
We love you, Sarah! and I want to say that because we're talking about what Grace has talked about is building community, not just community in terms of whether it's a block, but a community in terms of whether it's a nation, whether it's a city, whether it is the world. And the whole Occupy movement has essentially signaled to individuals that we can be different kinds of human beings. Initially, what has been raised is that the 1% and the 99%. What I contend is that the 99% are the real people and the 1% is a moving illusion. And that when we talk about what we look for the future, we have to analyze what is real and what is just trying to hang on. Grace talked about the framework of history. She talked about where we are in history. This movement of you sitting here today, gathered from all over the world, sitting in a backyard on the west side of Detroit, you are in a situation where history, as we speak of, is being made at this particular moment. Turn around and look at each other. Look at the beginning of a new world in terms of the way it looks and the way you can transform it by simply coming together. Superheroes. South Africa.
Yes.
South Africa. Yeah. Scotland. The west side of Detroit. I'm saying that to say, and Berkeley. I'm saying that because I've been involved in the movement for 40 years, at least.
I marched down the street in 1963 with Dr. King. I was 13 years old. I became involved in the Black Panther Party in 1968. That was about the same time I met Grace and Jimmy Boggs, not too long after that. That was at the height of the Black Power movement. That was at the height when we were talking about jobs and black mayors and black members of Congress and so forth. And that was a very, very important movement, because what the movement was about, it was about changing the perspective of how black people were viewed in terms of humanity. I was really glad to be here today, because I was talking to the two young people here from South Africa. Because if you look at where we were at that particular time, and you look at what's going on in South Africa, and you look at the transition, that kind of movement, in order to establish that democratic participatory democracy, was important. But it is not the end. It is not the end. It is the beginning. How many here believe that they can run the United States, as Jimmy Boggs said, better than the people who are running it now? No, come on now. I'm challenging you, because I'm saying, when I ask you that question, there's not an exuberance. I mean, you didn't jump up and say, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, I can do it.
Thank you, Jennifer Twigg. No, I'm saying that because you have to know in your consciousness, in your heart, as you develop, that you have the ability to transform this society. You have the ability to become new people and build new things, so that we can have a world that actually begins to envision what the future really looks like. You have to know that. You have to organize in terms of that. Even Occupy, as strong as it was a protest against the 1%, a protest against the banks. It was important because it made a fundamental challenge to capitalism as it exists. But it was not the end, it was the beginning. It was just the beginning. And you wait and see. If it remains there, some of you are going to be offered a job at one of the banking institutions. Some of you are going to be offered an opportunity to run for a political office and get money from the PAC. Some of you are going to be sought after, and some of you are going to be criminalized, and they'll say that you're just radicals and you're trying to take over. But none of that means anything, because it's all an illusion. The reality is what we're looking at here today. Remember, protest is only important to the degree that it builds program. To talk about where you're going, what you're doing, how you will transform a society, and the kind of people that you will become. It is not about the personality, and I'm glad that Occupy has moved beyond that. Back in the days when I got involved, you know, if you didn't make the 6 o'clock news, if you didn't have your fist up in the air, and you weren't wearing a big afro, you did not be presumed, you weren't presumed to be a leader. Today, today's leadership is more related not to the individual, but to the collective work that everybody is doing.
That's right, that's right.
Do I get an amen on that? Amen. It is not, the more you are involved in a movement, the more you realize it's not just about you.
That's right, man.
As a matter of fact, the more you get involved, you realize it is less about you than it is about the other yous that come out of what you do.
Amen. Come on.
You're trying to, at this particular point, I saw a 10-year-old here. I don't know whether the 10-year-old child that was here, whether she's listening to what you're saying, but I bet they are. And the thing of it is that people come up to me all the time and they say, Ron, I saw you when I was 10, when I was 9, when I was 16. Because they listen to what you say. Not only listen to what you say, but they emulate what you do.
That's right. Amen.
So we have to build the kind of new institutions that say to people, You can be more than you are today. You can transform the way things are. You moved into this house. You're having an impact on this neighborhood. And you moved in because you said that there are ways that people can build homes and build neighborhoods.
Yes.
And re-spirit neighborhoods and re-spirit communities. And that's what you're doing. So understand what your purpose is at this point. Grace asked me to talk about some of the things that are going on. This card on one side has the Coalition Against Police Brutality. We're dealing with a counter-revolution that is more militaristic now than it's ever been. There's just no Detroit police, Chicago police, LAPD, Justice Department, NSA. It is combined, and they're called multi-jurisdictional task forces. That is a military arm of the counter-revolution. Understand that. And the reason they have it is because their ideas are bankrupt. So when you begin to organize, the idea is to suppress you so that the ideas can't get out. But in the age of communications, it is very difficult for them to stifle your ideas. It is very difficult for them. It was difficult for them to stifle the ideas that we had in the Black Panther Party. And it wasn't just about carrying a gun. It was about feeding children. It was about creating new ways of education. It was about getting folks out of the prison industrial complex and into the community. So even after all of those years that they attempted to destroy us, I get young people coming up to me. They say, "You were in the Black Panther Party?" And they come up and they say, and I ask them, I say, "What did the Black Panther Party do?" Invariably they'll say to me, "They fed people." They fed people. Occupy will be remembered for what's happening in terms of, like here in the agricultural movement. You'll be remembered whether or not people will be able to eat when you leave, or if you stay. You'll be remembered as to whether or not people have housing. You'll be remembered whether or not people have thought about what a new society looks like in terms of how men and women will relate to one another. You'll be remembered in terms of whether or not people will still be talking about black against white and white against black, Asian against African, or whether they'll be talking about human beings in terms of how they're going to transform society. You'll be remembered as whether or not because you were out to build the strongest corporate entity, but you'll be remembered as to whether or not you were able to create things that actually allowed us to function for ourselves, independent of those corporate entities. Now let's face it, let's look at it. The empire that Grace talked about, that empire does not exist as it did anymore. But they're trying hard to try to reestablish it. I mean, they got troops all over Africa and all that kind of stuff. But even so, why doesn't it exist? Because people have become a lot more wise than they were before. The Coalition Against Police Brutality, we fought against police brutality. Police are still killing people, beating people. I just worked on a case last night, and we do that. But when we go into a community, we move to transform that community into a peace zone for life. Because if we can transform and minimize the violence that we wreak against one another, just like what the police do in relationship to us, then we're able to determine a better way of creating public safety. And the way we're moving to create public safety is so that we don't need police on every block, so that we don't need anybody with a gun on every block, that we resolve our issues through conflict resolution and mediation. The other thing is that we have individuals in terms of the Boggs Educational Center. We're talking about different types of education. A type of education that is grown out of the neighborhood, out of the communities in which we live. And in fact, I hearken back to it because it was related to some of the things that we used to do in the Panthers, the old Intercommunal Youth Institute. We were talking about education for functioning in your community, not education to be fed back into the corporate entity. We have the Feed 'em Freedom growers who are growing their own food and selling it to each other or sharing it over on the east side of Detroit. But it's not just about the food. Not the food that goes in your body just in terms of that food, but it's also about creating a whole tier of young people who are talking about how they can take a community that is ravaged like this and transform it into something that they control and they transform. That's what we need to do. Today, you as young people, you as some who are not so young, you as some who are older, you ask yourself, you ask more questions when you're involved in visionary organizing. You ask more questions than you answer. You ask yourself, when you leave here today, what is my mission to this group? What is my mission in relationship to helping to transform this city? And what is my mission in terms of helping to transform the world? And when you begin to answer these questions, they'll come back in terms of various forms. Some of you may write. Some of you may create organizations. Some of you may help us with police brutality and transforming that. And some of you may help us build peace zones. But in the process, as a visionary, the basic element is to transform yourself. Because if you change yourself first, you're in a situation where you can change the world. You can become a different human being by what you're doing, not necessarily just by what you're saying. There's a march tomorrow, and I didn't want to go there. You said there's a march tomorrow, but I will. I will. There's a march tomorrow that they're marching. It's a youth march. It's a youth march, but you might not like what I'm saying, Sarah. There's a march tomorrow, and the march is going to march 5 miles. Now, I know all of you are in good shape, and I know you can march 5 miles.
3 miles.
3.
Going once.
But the point of it is that Grace is not going to march 3 miles. There are a lot of people who are not going to march 3 miles. And I think it's a good mobilization. It's a good thing to protest and say what we should do. I don't want to know what you're going to do in the march. Tell me what you're going to do after the march. Tell me what you're going to do a week after the march, a month after the march, a year after the march. Tell me what you're going to do when marching doesn't change the way things are. When they marched in the South, they marched against fear. And if we march today, we should have a march maybe, when we march this time, why don't we march in the fall with all the people who are creating 200,000 bushels of food? Why don't we march and give that food out in the fall?
Mic's back on.
When we march, why don't we march for creating a different kind of public safety in our neighborhoods and saying we don't need to call the police, we need to increase the peace. When we march, why don't we talk about let's march and let's take some of the school buildings that are destroyed and begin to tell people how to recreate their communities in those schools. When we march, why don't we talk about how we can create a situation where we have less domestic violence in our neighborhoods, and we can create a framework where men and women don't have to argue with each other and fight with each other because they don't have enough money and they don't have a job. Let's find a way to create a framework so that we can resolve those conflicts in a peaceful way. So when we march and when we have a vision, I'm not putting down the march tomorrow. Go to the march.
Are you going to speak at it?
Support? No, I didn't even know. I heard about it. I heard about it.
You're welcome to speak there.
I heard about it. I may speak and I may say the same thing.
You're invited to speak. If you would like to speak, you are invited to speak.
I may say the same thing. But I'm saying the reason why I'm critiquing the march is Malcolm X, when Grace and James Boggs invited him here, Malcolm talks about a message to the grassroots. He talked about people from the bottom, building from the bottom. And that many of the so-called grassroots leaders, people didn't even know their names, but they knew what they did. when you leave the march tomorrow, there should be a cadre or cadres of people who are studying the next American Revolution. You need to have study groups. There should be groups of people who are reaching out for the various programs that we're doing and who are starting the arduous work that we see in this neighborhood. So, when we start the revolution, which has already started, when we are part of that revolution, let us make it one that will change our souls and that will not allow us just to become people who are absorbed by the basis of confrontation and promotion of self. Let us accept the fact that we've been put on this planet at this time in history so that we can change the way we live as human beings and so that we can reach for those things that we never would have imagined in terms of transforming our community.
And Ron Scott that are telling you to move beyond marches are not people that haven't marched. So, I mean, it's, so you actually hearing this from people who've done what you're doing, 50, 40, you know, Ron don't want me to put his age out there, but it's so just reiterating what Grace said about recognizing the time of the clock on the world. Amen. So Grace is leaving, so if you want to, she does have books and things with her if you're interested in purchasing any books or anything from her. She is getting ready to leave.
As people are getting ready to patronize some of these books, and these are some must-reads. It was absolutely a monumental experience to have Grace Lee Boggs come out to this neighborhood and address us. So let's just thank her. She's 97 years old. She is young this year, and so we just don't know how fortunate we are. People recognize her name worldwide. She just happens to live in Detroit. It's also very important that so many colorful and diverse faces have decided to come out to this neighborhood today. So give yourselves a thank you and a round of applause.
Yeah, I'll answer a few questions if there are any.
So I'm sorry that I stepped up front and I thought that Ron told me that he did answer questions, but we're going to give this mic back to him so that
any questions.
So that he can answer questions. But once again, we just thank you so much for being here. It does an incredible service to a community when they see people come from all over to be invested in the transformation that's taking place in the world all around us. That's imagination, and that's transformation. So thank you again for that. So the floor is open for any questions that you might have for Ron Scott. This is somebody that we want to have out and not ask questions. We didn't even know he was coming until he showed up. We sent some emails. He said, I think I'll be in town. We hadn't heard from him since that he was here at 4:59, 1 minute early. So we're grateful for that. So please ask him questions. Don't be intimidated.
Yes, there are no questions.
Talk about how you create peace, though. Ron, talk about how you create peace, though.
Okay, now let her ask the question to Theo, and then I'll go to you. There's someone else ask the question, and I'll go to you and Theo.
Okay, the system that we're in so often pits us against each other, whether it's by economic groupings, race, gender, whatever that happens to be. What would you recommend? How can we get out of that? You know, like what is your experience working with the Panthers? What is your experience in other movements? How can we help each other without, you know, putting up defenses and creating problems between ourselves when really we're on the same, we're using different means for the same ends, or we're using same means for the same ends, we just don't realize it.
When Huey P. Newton went to prison in 1966 for shooting two Oakland police officers who were attempting to arrest him when they were trying to stop the police brutality that was being visited upon the community. The organization, which was in its infancy, was confronted with how do we get him out of prison? And how do we promote the program of the party, 10-point platform and program, which embodies some of the things I just told you. They started collecting money, started focusing on people, and fortunately they were in a very interesting area. They were in Oakland and San Francisco, which is probably one of the most diverse areas of the country. Because of what the party was doing, there was an organization that was formed called the Red Dragon Party. They were Asians. There was an organization formed called the Brown Berets. They were Latinos. There was an organization formed up in Sacramento called the Young Patriots. They were white. There were various organizations that helped to stimulate the development of the women's movement. There were people who were like part of what we call the petty bourgeois, the middle class at that time. There were the folks who were working class across the spectrum. Churches, people who were not in churches, people who were Muslims, people who were Baha'i, so on and so forth. And there was a movement that was created, the Free Huey movement. If you go back and look at the movie, Huey Newton talks about the role of at the time, young white people. He said, because we have to organize together so that they won't become reactionary in relationship to us. This was at a time, remember, when there was a move not to have white people in black organizations. Now, there was a good reason for it, because in many cases, many of the white organizers had assumed the leadership and would not allow African Americans to do what they knew for self-determination. But the party correctly analyzed was, we have to have a vision that is greater than the incarceration of Huey Newton, and that vision has to be that America is in a phase of transformation, and that the young people who are speaking up can go either forward or backwards. Now, we see some that went backwards. Dick Cheney went backwards. But there were many that went forward. So as it stands, we're confronted with similar situations today. The discussions that were held some 40 years ago began to raise the question of gender, of race, of religion, of how people were looked at as human beings. Before it was over, the Black Panther Party, 40%, 45% of its leadership were women. You may not know that, but that was the case. Before it was over, we actually had members of the party who were African American who were expelled from the party because of racism, because they wouldn't work with their white comrades who were in some cases fighting in their arena just as hard as we were fighting. But it was based on us coming together around a program, around us working together. That didn't mean that sexism, racism, and all that other stuff wasn't there. But we set it up so that in the framework we had a basis where we could talk about it, struggle about it, do it in relationship to a program and work that we were doing. That's why the Occupy movement is so important, because when you come together, you can deal with all of these issues, and you got to be honest about them. And I look at it on the net. I look at what you're talking about on the internet. I see all of that stuff like, yeah, well, I think she said, or he said, or this or that. I love it. Because what it's doing is welding and building relationships. But it's got to be around a program. It's got to be around work. It's got to be around the mutual respect for ideas. And that way, when you begin to work, I'll never forget, and I'll give you the last point on this. I'll never forget, I was at a old Black Panther Party office, and the woman who outranked me at that time came in, and she said, all the men were sitting down, and she said, all the men get up and let the women have the chairs. Well, I didn't get up and let the women have the chairs. So everybody was looking at me, and it was a problem. And I said, well, Major Yvonne, let me tell you this. I said, most of the men in here, like the women, have been out working all day long. They're tired. They have put in 12, 15 hours. The people who should sit are the people who work the hardest. It is not based on their gender. It's based on what they've given to the people and to the community and what they've done. And that's what it should be. So that's why when Grace and others, when we talked about respiriting ourselves, looking at ourselves in our spiritual inner selves as opposed to our outer selves. And I want to say something else. I'm sorry, you get to talk. We talked about man and woman. Let me say something about man and woman. This society has made a great distinction in terms of sexes for particular reasons, to subjugate one and promote the other. But you know what? As much as we talk about the differences that we have, we are essentially the same species, and we have more similarities. And I was talking to somebody about that the other day. When I was growing up as a man, I had father and so forth, but when I grew up and I went to the Sweet Home Missionary Baptist Church, the folks who ran the church were the women. So a lot of the values I had in terms of caring for people, serving people, came out of that. A lot of the things I had in terms of defense and supporting and building community, that came out of some of the men too. But the thing of it is that we must never let gender, race, or station in life diminish what we think we can do. So if they say, if somebody ever says to you, you superhero can't come and be a superhero in the black community, then you ask them, is your community so free that you don't need a superhero? Well, if you don't need a superhero, then become a black superhero. Because the community needs superheroes, no matter who they are. So we have those kinds of things, and we have to operate on programs, and we have to operate on the character that we have inside of ourselves, rather than seeing the differences. This society has been very good at promoting differences and promoting frameworks and talking about the uniqueness, the differences of individuals, when we have more similarities than we have differences, and we have to do that based on program. One last point. Theo, how do we develop peace zones?
Yes, your peace zone. Talk about how you do that.
Well, I can talk about how we do it, but I'm telling you how it happened.
Okay.
We went out to see a woman who had, the father of her child had been shot 4 times by the police and been killed. He'd come over, he started arguing with her. And every time he got drunk, he'd come over and argue with her and wonder whether or not she was with another man. So he'd argued with her. 2 of them had argued, they had fought, then they were sitting down and talking. Turns out that the woman across the street, normally when the guy who was drunk, who normally would not do that if he had not been drinking, she could talk to him. This older woman in the community. She could talk to everybody. He hadn't talked to her, and she hadn't talked to him that day. When the police came in, the thing they did is threw him down, shot him in the back, shot him in the head, shot him here. His child saw it. But the thing of it is, after that happened, the families of both were angry. And when the funeral was about to come up, the 2 families wanted to shoot each other. So we had to have 2 funerals. We had to separate them. So here we had state violence, and here we had interpersonal violence. And the question was, what we were going to do. What were we going to do with both? Was one less important than the other? Was one more important than the other? Shouldn't we deal with both because they reflect violence in different ways? And that's when we evolved peace zones for life. We started talking about ways that we could, 1, begin to establish safety perimeters in our community. 2, we could begin to establish independent economic options in our community, like you always talk about, Theo, because so many of the battles we have come out of economics that we are not in a position to take care of ourselves. The other thing that we talked about was beginning to reestablish or establish, and I've talked to Yusuf about this, they talk about, the young people in the neighborhood being gangs. They say, this is a gang, that's a gang. The only gang that I'm interested in, well, I'm interested in getting rid of one gang. That's the 1% gang. But the only gang that I'm interested in criticizing, these young people form groups to protect one another. So what we have the responsibility of doing, every time I'm going out and done police brutality work, the same folks they talk about that are gang members, they'll come up to us and say, what can we do in our community? What can we do? Because they saw that you took an interest in their humanity first, that you tried to save their lives and the lives of their friends first. Then they said, we want to do something. So the thing of it is we then began to recruit some of these people and find out what were their interests, what did they want to do. Finally, in terms of peace zones for life, it's conflict resolution, mediation, and restorative justice. So we're finding out that when the big mama across the street could have intervened, there's usually somebody in the neighborhood that knows something is about to happen. The question is, do we intervene? And that's what we have to do. We begin to intervene because we love and we care about others. We've done that. We've done that in front of guns. We've done it in front of confrontations. We've done it because sometimes when people stop, they have the ability to begin to think. If they can be quiet for a minute, they can stop. As opposed to trying to take that moment and then after you shoot or beat or kill somebody, then you go back and think, why did I do that? Then in terms of mediation, the question is what do you want that I have? What can I give you? What can I share? How can we both win this situation? And finally, restorative justice. If I take something from you, is the only solution I have to call the police and have you locked up? Or maybe there's another way that I can find out, because usually if somebody takes something from you, Theo, you know who took it. Or somebody in the neighborhood knows who took it. So in that sense, if we can set up a framework, and this is what we're doing, where people can bring it back and talk about it and resolve a situation without that person getting put on lockdown for years because of something that happened that they made a mistake on, then we restore them back to the community. But we've got to have the kind of programs that you're trying to create in order to do that. And that's simply put, that's what we're doing in terms of peace zones. That's it. Is that it is restoring the neighbor to the hood. It is creating a framework where we resolve our own issues. It's creating a situation where we have our own justice system in terms of resolving things, and creating an economic framework so that people don't argue and fight over trivia.
Give another round of applause for Ron Scott, please. Ron, you have a website, correct?
Yeah, it is Detroit Coalition, DetroitCoalition.org.
DetroitCoalition.org. Look up Peace Zones for Life, Ron Scott. This next individual that I'm going to call up to the stage is one of my comrades. He's a partner with the Urban Network. He is the founder of the Urban Network. He is a chairman of Black Soldiers and also the chairperson for Helping Our Prisoners Elevate. And I'll let you him talk some more about himself. As Ron mentioned, restoring the neighbor back to the hood, he actually coined that phrase.
By the way,
so I would like for you to give a round of applause for Yusef Shakur.
What up, though? That's what we say in Detroit.
What up, though?
Yeah, my name is Yusef Shakur. I'm from the west side of Detroit. Man, what's what I want to say? I really want to start off, man. Every time I get an opportunity to speak, particularly to a predominantly white crowd, I have to say this. If you're not going to take what I have to say to heart, particularly Detroit, you're wasting my motherfucking time. You're wasting the time of my city, particularly a city that's 85% black. When you talk about the struggles of oppression, you're talking about the impact on people of color. When you add Southwest Detroit, which is predominantly brown, you're talking about a 95% city of color. So when you talk about the democratic rights of folks being assaulted here in the city of Detroit, you're talking about black and brown people who are being assaulted. When you talk about education and the schools being closed, you're talking about black and brown, because we're at the point of that. When you talk about
now this may pull
what's happening in Colorado, what's happening on college campuses of gun violence, we live with that every day in our community, in our city. So when Ron talks about peace zone for life, when you talk about restore the neighbor back to the hood, those are the fundamental things of where our struggle is at. Fundamentally, we're talking about rebuilding our community by rebuilding the human being. This is an ongoing conversation for black and brown people, where our names have been stripped, our religion has been stripped, our humanity has been stripped from us. Now, my name has not always been Yusef Shakur. And being Yusef Shakur is reclaiming who I am as an African in America. And claiming an African in America is claiming my independence, my declaration of liberation to my community and to myself. Because you understand how I got here was not a choice of my own. So if you look at those dynamics, economically, politically, and culturally, you're talking about a historical oppressed community, oppressed human beings. So as we restore those rights to black and brown people, you have to understand your connection to that and how you become a part of that struggle. And if you're not willing to engage on the ground level, why are you here? I had to ask that question. And so overstanding, and I say overstanding versus understanding because that's our fucking problem. We've been going under for too long. We need to go over. And going over, we see clearly what's going on within our communities. You know, Ron was nice about the march for tomorrow. I'm not the nice one. You know, because again, when you talk about problems in Detroit, we're talking about areas in these communities like this. You know, I don't know how many of y'all had opportunity to go on the east side. It's the same thing. When you go deep northwest, it's the same thing. You know, we need to be marching right here. Marching to build communities. Marching to build love and hope right here. Because you talk about march, you go next door to neighbor. March for what? How does that help me feed my family? How does that stop me from selling my body to keep feeding my family? A mother may propose to you. When you go to the liquor store or the gas station, you see the young black male standing on the corner. March for what, nigga? I'm marching right here. So when you look at these scientific dynamics of our community, you really have to look at it clearly to grasp the correct analysis of what's going on. You know, Ron talked about grandstand politics. That's not solving anything. Serving the community is what's solving things. Serving the community is serving yourself. And I would also say this: you don't have to be from poverty to help somebody. You don't have. That's not a qualification. Let's throw that out the window. What is a qualification is giving a fuck. That is a qualification. Qualification is shedding your white skin privilege and understanding that you're a human being and seeing yourself in those circumstances and being willing to come sit at somebody's table and break bread with them and help them remind them that you are a human being just like I am. And us together can work through these problems. Us together can become a united fist. So when you talk about the 99%, and you talk about the 1%, you know, we really have to go back and look at history and look at these dynamics, because we can't just act like it just happened. We can't continue to talk like it just occurred in the last 4 or 5 years. Because if you do that, you're disrespecting me. You're disrespecting black and brown people, because the 1% was founded on that. So when you talk about Occupy, it has to be a strategy. But what does, you know, Grace talked about evolution. Where does Occupy evolve to? It just can't continue to be occupied. You know, when you look at Malcolm and Martin and the contrasting difference, you're talking about strategies. When Martin took nonviolence and made it a way of life, that's just a strategy. That's a philosophy pertaining to a specific situation. Malcolm's position was, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. But I'm going to be peaceful until then. So again, you know, there's nothing wrong with occupying something if it fits the situation out of the analysis that we're talking about. But when do we talk about liberation? When do that becomes part of the conversation? If you're talking about revolution, you're talking about liberation. You're talking about self-determination. When do these become part of our language? But they become part of our language when we revolutionize ourselves to liberate ourselves from the internal oppression that we've allowed ourselves to become prisoners to, and we're the wardens of that. And I challenge you all to go back and read, if you haven't yet, Franz Fanon, which was considered the revolutionary Bible of the 60s, Wretched of the Earth. And it helps you understand the seller's mentality, and it helps you understand the oppressed mentality. So the oppressed have begun to take on the characterization of their oppressors, because they have not been taught how to free themselves from being oppressed. The oppressed are seeking power. By oppressing each other gives this illusion of being powerful. Selling dope, they feel like they're powerful because they're not qualified to go get a job. So when you're in this equation of job, how many of us right now are willing to, those of us have a job, to come and put money on the table for those who don't have a job? So that's how we work ourselves out of a job, by supporting each other, by being a backbone for each other. How many of us are willing to sacrifice for each of us? If you're not willing to do that, you might as well throw reimagine out the fucking window. Reimagine comes with sacrifice. Reimagine comes with commitment. Reimagine comes with love. If you love something enough, you'll do whatever it takes. See, when you talk about black folks, we've been reimagining since we got here. We reimagining slavery, reimagining the post-slavery. And that has fueled us to where we at. So when you look at Detroit, you're looking at a city post-segregation to present segregation. Post-segregation to present segregation. So because you see, this city is 85% black, and the surrounding cities are 85% white. So when you look at the dynamics of the political infrastructure and economic infrastructure, you're talking about an embargo. Because the surrounding cities and how they deal with Detroit is the same way America deals with Cuba. Unfair politics. But they don't share with us the way they share with the cities, with their neighboring cities, or any other black cities. Why? Because, again, you're talking about segregation. You're talking about racism still has not been dealt with. You know, when we go ask for help, they want our water. They want our park. They want our school system. They want all our assets. But when Royal Oak asks Warren for help, sure, here you go, no problem. Just give it back to when you get it. It's the good old boy system. But again, we have to understand history and understand the dynamics, what racism and white supremacy is, and how it streamlines down to creating these oppressive layers. And we have to be human enough to see what it is and call it what it is. So we're declaring. When you look at black folks, they are the vanguard of this city. And the question is, how can you support that? How can we develop politics of solidarity, politics of unity, that are engaging people from a hopeless situation to hope? From a hopeless situation to hope. Hope inspires action. You just can't have a conversation. You just can't go out and party. We have to have action. What that action looks like comes out of strategy, comes out of conversation, of looking at an analysis of what these problems are. But we can't continue to deal with the surface of it. We have to get to the root. So again, my name is Yusef Shakur. I own the Urban Network bookstore. I'm an author. So come check us out. All power to the people. My website is yusefshakur.org. Yusef Bunty Shakur.
All right, let's give another hand. So we want to give you an opportunity to ask Yusef some questions. We want to try to move it quickly. We can start questions on this end. We'll continue on that end because we're going to usher everybody urgently in just a couple minutes down to pass out these supplies to these youngsters. We get to get this powerful move for all of these people from outside of this neighborhood to participate in a giveaway for the kids who live in it. And so before we do that, though, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions to Mr. Shakur, and then we'll shift down that way. Questions? Don't be shy. Maybe he covered everything.
No. I want to know the location of your bookstore, and if you have programs there, workshops, etc.
Location of the bookstore, whether he has workshops, etc.
Location is on West Grand River, McGraw. The address is 5740 Grand River. Yes, we have workshops. Swana Petty is the executive director of Urban Network. It is also operates as a community center. We have computers there. We have TV. We do movie nights, resume development, open mics, a weekly poetry series. We're gauging the most pressed communities at the fundamental level of being oppressed, and we're creating we created a liberated zone right there in that oppressed community.
What's the capacity of the store?
The capacity of the store depends on about 130.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
He wasn't sure, but the executive director knew. Question over here.
Good, okay.
Okay, I'm just going to be a wee bit provocative here. Sorry. But my question is how, when you talk about the white supremacy, we've all bought into it. Not just people with white skin, people with all skins. And not just white supremacy, but immigrants versus nationalists. And, you can go to any part of the world and it really doesn't matter about the skin color. If you're not actually from that landmass and you start to speak and they know it, they treat you differently. My question is, I live on the east side, and I brought the flyer around and I was chatting with my neighbors and I said, you really should come because my block is pretty progressive and I think something really positive could happen. And they said, oh, that's just for you people, imagining, we've gone way too far beyond that. Now we just have to look out for ourselves, and that's it. So I hear this a lot. It's almost like, you privileged people can imagine something different, but actually it's just going to get worse, and we just got to look out for our little piece of turf here. So how do we all shift that concept?
When I talked about earlier, I assume those people you're talking about was black?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but again, the answer to your question, Claire, is pull the skin off of it. There are people, but again, you have to understand the dynamics with what inspires a response. Most black people, in particular in the city of Detroit, have accepted their condition. They ass been kicked. Let's put it as frankly as that. So when you talk about a conversation like this, in particular, no one who has not been hasn't lost their humanity, hasn't lost who they are, it's easy to understand what social justice is. It's easy to understand why your school systems, that school down the street should be stayed open, because your relationship to that's different than ours. What I mean by that is when we're constantly have been force-fed poverty, when we constantly have been force-fed degrading ourselves in such a low value. And when you look at these shirts, there's a lot of people on this shirt who have been assassinated, who have been killed. That spirit begins to die of resistance. That spirit of resistance begins to die. So we have to give that spirit a rebirth. And give that spirit a rebirth. We can't continue to, when that attitude comes, it's a matter of consistency. And I get it myself. From black folk, but like I didn't get in details. Like we do a school supply, we're doing one tomorrow. We've been doing it 5 years straight. The first year we did it, we had like 30 people come out, and some we're giving away free stuff. Why? Because no one has came back to love on them. No one has came back to hug them. Now, over 5 years in the making. Yeah, so we've done it 7 times, but 5 years consecutively, we've grown from like 30 people to over a couple hundred people every year. We just did one July 7th. We're doing one August 25th. So we're doing 2 in 1 year. Out of the consistency of the work we've done, have rebuilt the pride of themselves to say, I can fight. My life is worth fighting for. My children is worth fighting for. Again, we can't. That's where you get your skin in the game. Is being consistent. Like if you're saying you really care about this community, you're not coming as a white person or brown, but you're coming as a human being. So doing that first year, you might get your window blasted out, you might get your car stolen. We go through that all the time. We go through that all the time. So are you committed? Because they're really earning your stripes. She all right. She got her bus. She got her window bus. She got her car. She one of us. So now, how crazy it may sound, this is the dynamic socially of our community. But you're transforming that community because they're seeing the humanity in you and they recognize their own humanity. I ain't gonna keep busting her window, man. We busted her window last week. She all right. She ain't even call the police on us. She can fed us cookies. She still, because when you stop seeing the good in others, you stop seeing the good in yourself. So it's very important that you get on the ground level and you show and prove. Show and prove is going to build relationships. To build those relationships is going to build the bridges to walk over to do this work. And you're still going to have naysayers. You're still going to have naysayers, but consistently doing the work is going to convert those naysayers into doers. Because many people want to do this work, but where do I begin? How do I fit in? Because I don't want to end up on like one of these guys in this shirt. But when you do this type of work, when you understand the history of America, which is the most militant motherfucker in this country. So I don't want to hear nothing about militant. When you look at America, that is still a fucking empire. That is still oppressing, that still is stripping the lives of human beings. That you have to fight. You have to fight with all your heart. Any other questions?
We're going to take the questions down there at the other end. We're gonna finish them down there at the other end because they're waiting. Yusef does have books on him if you're interested in purchasing a book for him. And again, his website is yusefshakur.org. He can be reached at 313-459-6008. And Fuzzy, you can start your question. Maybe y'all can walk down the street. That's revolutionary while he answers.
This is real quick. July 7th, I came out to Yusef's event. And I want to tell you, I didn't know Yusef until I went to that event. And what I saw at that event is this man, formerly a gang member, brought enemy gangs. They have now bridged the gaps. And if somebody can bridge gaps within their own segregated communities and become a global citizens within those communities, which I believe that is really your message, become a global citizen and take care of all the needs of all of us, not just some of us. It's not just us. Let's really work on justice.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to go down to the field where the boss and the DJs are.
I didn't think I could stand still that long.
They did.
Oh, you did a great job. That was fun.
Let's sit down to the street. I know we're excited about getting.
Possible.
Let's get down there. They're watching for the stampede, please. We can make it. We can make it. So many young people.
Interview you just say hi. Yeah, okay, cool. So, oh, you too, you're going to get away.
You want me to tape you while you're interviewing?
No, I just want to tell me what's going on, and then when we get back home, we'll put it online. We'll give you a link to the video, maybe.
Last question.
Yeah, like what's going on?
Going on here or
right here.
What's going on right here? Jason, this is of ours. People of Power, initiating a community program, serving the community. We look at history. Particularly, you look at my shirt. A lot of members on my shirt was Black Panther Party members. So my point with that is
we're past tense. Yeah.
Where they serve community through free breakfast program. We're serving community through school supplies. And the same thing we're going to be doing tomorrow. Once you serve the community, you build the self-worth and the self-pride of that community. Now they become a resistant force to the oppressive force that's looking to knock them down and kick their ass. And now they know why they need to fight. Fighting for their humanity.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we'll show this to Dr. Jackson too when we get back to Muskegon.
Yeah, show it to him.
Okay. Yeah, thanks again.
No problem, man.
Let me see your hand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awful, isn't it?
Can we get the fifth grade, please? Fifth grade. Fifth grader.
Pretty cool.
You have to do that by engaging with people.
Oh my goodness.
Go ahead, Sue. Let her rip.
What grade you in, baby? What rip?
I don't know. I missed that second. Yes.
We got any birthday babies?
We did it right there on the curb. Dylan was spraying and I was holding the